An auteur, by the definition, is usually a person, most of the time a director, that has a distinct design language throughout their work over a series of films. A signature style, theme, or pattern that the audience can identify as the author of the film. This includes the way a film looks and feels, that includes specific stories, narratives, editing styles, shots, colour palettes, use of actors, and mise-en-scène, just to name a few. While it is normally directors that are attached to the auteur theory, I argue that this isn't always the case, and I believe this theory can also be applied to studios. In this audiovisual essay, I'll be discussing The Witch, directed and written by Robert Eggers and the auteur studio behind it, A24. As I have already stated, I argue that not only directors, but rather studios as well can be considered an auteur. This is because many A24 films do have a similar design and characteristics of the auteur theory, as you see throughout this audiovisual essay. Before I dive into my main case study of The Witch, I'll briefly talk about the studio A24. A24 is an American independent entertainment company that was founded back in 2012, and since then they have released several films and even TV shows that have only garnered more attention in the last few years. Not to mention several film awards and social media buzz around those films as well. Some of their other works include The Farewell, Midsummer, Hereditary, Lady Bird, Lobster, The Green Room, Moonlight, The Bling Ring. The main example I'll be talking about, however, is The Witch, or as it's also known as The Witch spelt with 2 V's, or The Witch, a New England folktale. The Witch is a period piece set in 1630s New England. It is a folktale supernatural horror film, and it is based off real historic documentation from that time, as well as paintings and other folklore. This story follows a devout Puritan family who moves into a farm by the woods. However, these woods are wickedly evil and they begin to encounter disturbing forces that claim the life of each member of the family in quite a disturbing manner. I will note that while each death is disturbing, the fact that the first family member to be killed off is none other than baby Samuel, which also sets the tone and atmosphere for the film. The only surviving member is the eldest daughter, Tamison, who is also the protagonist of this film. Throughout this film, she is often blamed for being a witch by each member of the family at some point.
A witch! I've seen her in her riding cloak.
Due to the events happening. By the end of the film, it is also revealed that the family's billy goat called Black Phillip turns out to be the main antagonist, and only reveals himself at the end as Satan after posing as the family's stock animal. As this is revealed, Thomason is then summoned into the evil woods and then levitates with other witches, joining a coven, and the film ends there. As this film is a new narrative formula, it is subjective and up for interpretation. As Barnes expresses about the new narrative formula, it disdains expressivist, subjective, formal articulations, or more exactly, reinvests psychological in character and dialogue. While of course it was written and directed by Robert Eggers, there is no doubt that any other studio would have allowed this vision to the extent that A24 has given. The Witch also includes a heavily eerie atmosphere conveyed with the landscape, costumes, and iconography of folklore, making it that much more authentic and much creepier, as you'll see from this clip. They also speak early modern English as well to add to that factor.
Dost thou understand my English tongue?
As Walton also states, The Witch combines realistic period detailing with bluntly imaginary spaces and figures. As I have talked about The Witch's story, there are many more characteristics throughout this film that have become part of A24 and the auteur theory. This includes a leading female character played by an actress who wasn't well known then or typecasted, such as Anya Taylor-Joy. Same deal with the director, Robert Eggers, who was also on the cusp of becoming a filmmaker during this time. I also argue that this film isn't like other horror supernatural films, more specifically isn't like blockbuster films we would see at cinema normally. As Berliner examines, films that define itself against a classical narrative blockbuster is an art film, which is what The Witch is and all other A24 films are as well. It has a distinct design language not only through director Robert Eggers, but also as the studio, as their catalogue allows directors to follow their style. The story itself is niche in the way it is told and the fact that it is based off real historic documentation and only had a budget of $4 million. It is an innovation of genre and narrative due to the nature of how it was filmed. For example, normally a blockbuster film would have a lot more action and jump scares, whether this film is told in a more unconventional way and more with dialogue. As it is an art film, it also ticks off the checklist, which includes a literary adaptation, geographic exoticism, lush visual style, award show buzz, new narrative, non-linear use of chance or coincidence, inscrutable characters not fully knowable, and conflicts not complete. This film, among many other A24 films, also exhibit open text, subjective narration, and style reinforces illusion of reality. As I've mentioned with my main case study, there are a few more films that follow this auteur characteristic. Some examples include The Farewell, Midsummer, Room, Lady Bird, Spring Breakers, and The Bling Ring, that all include leading female characters with directors/actors on the cusp of becoming into the industry or typecasted, with a unique story, either based off a true story or a story told in an unconventional way. Other A24 films that showcase a unique premise include The Lobster, Moonlight, The Lighthouse, Green Room, Mid-90s, and Swiss Army Man. As I've mentioned a few examples, now we can see that the characteristics of an A24 film that usually include a leading female character, budget under a certain amount, a filmmaker and or actor on the verge of breaking into the industry, playing against types, and not to mention how social media plays a critical presence in interaction and advertisement. As A24 is a contemporary studio, it knows its audience. It knows that most people have or interact with social media in one way or the other, which gives off movie buzz and hype around the movie as it did heavily with The Witch. Another characteristic is the fact A24 stands out from the crowd. As Ehrlich says, A24 has established itself as the film industry's most forward-thinking company by releasing the kind of mid-size, stylish, quality films that seemed on the verge of going extinct, transforming them into a collective theatrical experience. This also means that it is a cool alternative compared to other major blockbuster films. A24 shows a deep innovation of genre, narrative, and interesting unique stories told in different ways. This includes period pieces, stories based on true stories, and stories that are told in an unconventional way. This isn't to say that all A24 films are exactly the same, but it's enough to be able to distinguish the characteristics of an A24 film. An example of this distinguished characteristic comes from Johnson and Gray, as they explore the idea of authorship is based usually on a singular person or creative studio that has also had an impact on popular culture in some way, that many people would be able to identify even without a name. For example, one could use the term from the director or studio of The Witch, and people are able to identify what kind of film to expect and who it is. Another example of A24 being an auteur is something like the biographical film Lords of Dogtown. I argue had it been released in today's cinema climate, that would have easily been an A24 film due to the nature of the niche story, which is based off the real events and lives of the Lords of Dogtown back in the 1970s. It has gotten to that point where you can easily distinguish what an A24 film consists of. While I have talked about A24, I argue that some other studios can also be considered auteur. The auteur theory does fluctuate and there is a bit of mix and match, but I argue that the theory doesn't even just stop at film studios. This can even apply to some television and even video game studios as well. As stated previously, Saras explains that the auteur theory foundation stemmed from the Kahu critics, which then helped shape the auteur theory to what it is considered today. This theory would go on to be mostly associated with the director or author of the film, who has a distinct design language in their work. An auteur must exhibit those characteristics over a group of films, which includes the techniques, individual style, and internal meaning from the author, which I argue is exactly what all A24 films have done. They exhibit similar characteristics over many films and fit into the auteur theory category. In conclusion, throughout this audiovisual essay, I stand by the fact that the auteur theory can also be applied to studios such as A24. The Witch being an excellent example of the beginning of A24's emerging presence to the film industry and maintaining a similar set of characteristics throughout all their films. It is also important to note that it is refreshing and fantastic when films divert from a formula, play against types, don't conform to the cliche or structure of a Hollywood film. Rather, it is fantastic that we now have A24 to thank for this change of pace in cinema, and there's no stopping them anytime soon.